Tonight, Defense Minister secures ceasefire in bloody Tripoli conflict as he declares all faceless individuals and groups financing the tribal conflict will be smoked out and prosecuted.
But I can assure you that they are doing what they have to do. If there are people like the CID, will smoke all of them out. The police CID are not sleeping when it comes to that aspect. They've arrested a lot of people. And once they have evidence against you, they will prosecute you.
We tell you about efforts to transform the temporary ceasefire into lasting peace.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
Top Story is always brought to you by Bond Savings and Loans. Your success, our passion. Also brought to you by Gasem, the nation builder. Vodafone, the future is exciting, ready, and nationwide health insurance, your healthcare family. After weeks of bloodshed, destruction to property, and the displacement of thousands of people, factions in the raging conflict in Tripoli have finally agreed to cease fire. Now, journalists is now learning that attention has now shifted to tracking and, in the words of the defense minister, smoking out those individuals and groups financing the conflict. We'll hear from the defense minister shortly. But first, listen to the head of research at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center, Dr. Kofi Annan, detailing the sophisticated systems exploited by these individuals and groups who fuel the violence and provide weapons to poor peasant farmers to kill themselves.
I'm going to show something that is not particularly pleasant. The ordinary people who use these guns to murder themselves are not interested in the calculus of those who supply the guns. Tripoli and the violence that we are seeing is a consistent structural failure of our unwillingness to use intelligence as a proactive tool, first to identify the conflict profiteers, to track where the guns are coming from, and to ask ourselves some very fundamental questions. What is it good for that the Tripoli violence continues? Okay? We tend to have an altruistic approach to understanding violence. So we show a couple of young girls who are crying because they cannot do their BEC. Those things are necessary, but I also divert attention from asking the hardcore instrumentalist questions. What is it good for that the violence continues? Who are those who are profiting? Okay, how come that we are not able to identify the profiteers of these conflicts in this country? Okay, Tripoli is not going to end today or tomorrow because the interventionist approaches that we are using are totally wrong. We've started, and I think here my good friend Mecca will be able to explain this better. You don't start by sending the Oga himself to go and talk to the conflict parties. When Oga talks, and 2 days later, the conflict explodes again. Okay? We are tackling the conflict from the very top when we have not understood the structural dynamics and the players who are playing these games like chess. Okay? So now we've basically bottled ourselves up. If Oga has gone to say, please, I appeal to you in all humility as the leader of this country to stop fighting. And the people did not stop the fighting. What does it mean? Okay, who can then go again and appeal? Okay, so those who are advising on the conflict resolution side don't seem to know their ABCs of conflict resolution. Okay, so we are handling the problem or tackling it from the totally wrong end.
So we had Dr. Anin raising concerns towards the tail end there about the approach. We'll analyze that shortly. But he also talks about those who are financing the conflict and those who are benefiting from it. The defense minister has today been speaking about efforts at tracing, tracking individuals who are financing the weapons and the conflict in general. He's opened up slightly about the role that the CID is playing. He's constrained because of the intelligence and the sensitivity of the operation the CID is carrying out, but at least he assures that the individuals behind it will be smoked out. Listen.
I'm not able to answer this question directly because I may compromise what the police CID are doing, and I don't want to go into details, but I can assure you that they are doing what they have to do. If there are people like the CID will smoke all of them out, but I'm able to expatiate on what they are doing. They may compromise on their job, but I can tell you that the police CID are not sleeping when you are coming to that aspect. They know exactly what they are doing, and they are doing they are doing a lot of work on that. But I don't want to talk to you. I think that it will not be wise on my part to say in details what they are doing, but they are doing a lot when it comes to that aspect.
But you can confirm that the persons, for instance, who are trafficking the arms that are being used there are being traced?
But like I said to you, that the police CID are not sleeping when it comes to that aspect. They've arrested a lot of people. And once they have evidence against you, they will prosecute you. And that one, we all support that. So the police are working on that aspect. The CID are working on that aspect. And I can assure you that those things will be done. But I don't want to make a statement that will prejudice their job, that will give leave to people. But like I just said, they are doing their job on that aspect.
So that is the defense minister. And this really is at the heart of the problem. The guns flooding Tripoli and the other conflict zones in the north. Remember that these are poor peasant farmers. So how are they able first to afford these guns? And we've been told that some of these guns are not just those manufactured locally, but some of them are AK-47 smuggled in from elsewhere. Are they buying it themselves? Are they farming, peasant farmers, and using the small proceeds they have to buy the guns? Or there are people behind it? The minister has said it, there are people behind it. They will smoke them out. And that's why we want to delve into that aspect of this and speak to those who have been researching into this across the sub-region, because there are other countries in the sub-region where guns have flooded the countries and we've seen the conflicts there. Let's bring in Colonel Festus Abuaji, who's worked in the sub-region on this matter and has consulted for many governments. Colonel, thank you for your time here on Top Story. We're also joining us on the telephone line shortly, right now, really, is Emmanuel Kotia, who is also going to join us shortly on the subject. But my colleague, Gifty Ando-Apia, just returned from the conflict zone, traveling and talking to people and seeing the devastation for herself, and is in the studio with me. Let's start with the conversation that we've just been having about the guns, because if you take the guns away from the people, it becomes very hard for the conflict to sustain itself. And that seemed to be at the heart of the problem. What did you observe as far as that is concerned? What are we learning from your visit? But where the guns are coming from, how they are getting it, who is financing?
So I've been trying to get some answers from the minister himself when I met him in Tripoli, and he said that he plus the Northeast minister said because our borders are porous, it looks as if they're getting these, most of them, from outside the country. So they're getting these from neighboring countries. First of all, don't forget that these are blacksmiths. They hunt as well, so they have the guns. But it appears that they get most of them from across the border. Information I'm also picking from the ground from security operatives there is that for those that they have arrested, sometimes when they arrest people with arms, they'll say their chiefs give them those arms, and also those chiefs, when you go further to interrogate, seem to have bought it from neighboring countries. And then the question, of course, is how are they getting the money to get these arms? It
appears from what we hear from QC experts, there are some other individuals who maybe is providing in finance and buying these guns for them.
Yeah, it does appear so, but so far, what we know is that they are blacksmiths, so they can manufacture it themselves.
Okay.
Their chiefs are buying it for them. That's according to operatives on the ground who I've spoken to, and the chiefs are getting it from outside. Evans, don't forget also that if you take away the guns, there's also the setting up for fire, which they do very often when there's an attack. So if they storm a particular village, what they would do is that you want to burn down the houses, and because the roofs are touched, it's very easy to just set it on fire. So the guns aside, the fire is also a weapon that they use in this conflict.
Okay. So a few areas that we've learned from your visit is, one, it's coming across from the border. Two, they're manufacturing it themselves.
Yes.
Three, there is a cultural background to this where some of the families seem to, and individuals in the family have a certain prehistoric roles to wield guns.
As warriors. Yes.
And so you must own one, and so the family will invest in one.
Yeah.
But then this, I guess, also then becomes a weapon for perpetuating conflict, once there's conflict. As well.
It does. That's because there was this conquest mindset back then. So that's why there are families, there are lineages in which these people are warriors. You are supposed to lead the fight. You're supposed to lead the conflict when it comes. But that's the historical background. Okay. But then we have moved from there. And so, like you said, there are people who are behind this, people who are fueling it. Like the minister said, they're looking for those people. And so there is a cultural background, and then there is the people who are feeding off of it in these times and using it, pushing the conflict to go on.
Let me bring in now Colonel Festus Abuaji. Colonel, thank you for your time here on Top Story.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us on the telephone line right now is a security expert, Brigadier General Emmanuel Kotia. Hello, Brigadier General. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm not a Brigadier General.
Let me bring in Festus Abuaji here. Mr. Abuaji, you had worked across the sub-region, and guns we know is a wash in the sub-region. It's finding its way into Tripoli. The minister says to us tonight that one of the things you're doing working with the CID is smoking the people who are financing the weapons and prosecuting ones as evidence. What's your comment on, first, how the weapons are coming in? We know some of them are smuggled in, but those financing it and maybe benefiting from this conflict.
Well, let me start by saying, and from across our borders are not a new phenomenon. All the work done by Kofi Annan Center and other centers, including the National Commission on Small Arms, will indicate that weapons have been in this country, illicit weapons, locally manufactured, illegally imported, have been with us way back to the time of the Kokumba-Nanumba conflict, 1994. We did retrieve some of them, as I have recorded in my book on the Ghana Army. But then it looks to me that we are lazy institutionally, and therefore we only tend to act when there is conflict and appear to be doing something to retrieve, recover weapons, prosecute, and so on. Given that conflict itself is a system with its own political economy that draws in entrepreneurship, who see a market and who provide these weapons, the efforts to contain the spread of illicit small arms and ammunition should be an ongoing event. It should be sustained. But as I've said, it is a network of gunsmiths, of importers who bring in weapons and cartridges, and of local industries, including blacksmiths that all of us know, across the length and breadth of this country, not only in the Volta region, Alavanya or whatever, but all over the country, who are able to copy even military-type assault rifles, and to a fairly degree of lethality.
I mean, we have local people with the skill to do that in Ghana?
Oh, yes. It is recorded, as I have said, in publications by Kofi Annan, by the Democratic Control of Armed Forces, which is based in Sweden. There is local capacity to copy weapons. Indeed, we can go back to the times of the Ashanti Gonja Wars and so on. Samori Babatu, all of them had industries that were replicating European type, weapons. And we have perfected that capacity. And therefore, weapons that are produced locally, given that they are competitive in price to those that are imported, are easily accessible and can be moved in and around the country with ease, are even more attractive to those who need them. And of course, I should also say that during the revolution, that period, it is on record that a number, or it is general knowledge, there is empirical evidence, that a number of weapons were brought into the country to enhance national and regional security. Some of them were found during the Kukumba Nanumba War 1994. You see what I mean? And I believe that unless they have degraded, those weapons, if very well serviced and maintained, are still available to those who own them. There is a motivation to have weapons because conflict produce insecurity. And as your speaker said, there is also a cultural, historical dimension where people need to have guns, culturally or historically. So the mix of all of these motivations, given that we are lazy institutionally, we create an environment where weapons are flowing in and out of conflict zones.
But here's my question. Mm-hmm. If the weapons are flowing, and I think that's not in doubt now, to these areas like Tripoli, very poor, one of the poorest parts of the country, really. These are peasant farmers mostly. And from what my colleague who just returned from the conflict zone tells us and the videos we've seen, these are very poor people with thatched roofs and houses and farmers, peasant farmers. How are they able to afford these guns, even if it's locally produced?
Well, there is also the factor of mobilization. So an individual peasant farmer doesn't need to buy a weapon. But some of their ethnic group heads, individuals, opinion leaders, will acquire those weapons and give to their clansmen in order to provide security for the ethnic group. And of course, we shouldn't mince words. At the bottom of all of these are also the political factors, depending on who is in power and who creates a certain avenues for groups that they support to have easy access to weapons and so on and so forth. I mean, all of this is general knowledge. But the idea of peasantry or poverty indeed could themselves be a motivation factor for that person to acquire a weapon to protect the little property that he or she has. It doesn't dissuade them. But I think, as some other analysts have suggested, this is a network. It's a survival of ethnic groups. It is a survival of their identities and their prestige. And therefore, no cost is too much, to have weapons that they believe can offer them protection against groups that they perceive to be their enemies.
And just hold the line for me briefly. Gifty, you just returned from the conflict zone, and I make the point to Colonel about the fact that these are generally very poor people. How are they able to afford the guns? But you say that is not completely true from what you've seen on the ground.
Yes, it's not that simple to say. You could put them in that category that we know that that part of the country is usually very poor. We have very poor people there, but there are very rich farmers there because they have vast lands. They have dozens of acres on which they farm. And don't forget that most of the food that we consume here in Accra,
so the yam, etc.,
it's coming from there. They have money. They have cattle. They have herds of cattle. They have sheep. So they're not that poor. I mean, some of them are poor, but not all of them are.
Okay, so they are very rich folks in that part of the country.
Yeah.
Who can afford, because of the vast lands they have and they cultivate a lot of their crops that they sell, etc. They have, and you tell a story of how some of the deserted communities, you go in there, you see the cattle, the sheep, the cow, etc. Just idling about because their owners have left them behind.
The information I picked on the ground is that part of those who benefit from conflict are those who would usually go for the spoils, if you like. So you have
the spoils of the conflict.
Yes, the spoils of the conflict. So after communities desert, people desert the communities. You have all these cattle, you have sheep walking around, you have sometimes herds of them, and then you have those who fuel this cattle because they know what they've done. They go and they just take them away.
So you just find a truck. You've caused it. People have fled the town. The cattle and the sheep just idling about.
Yeah.
Get a truck and move them in and then take them off.
It could be a simplistic argument, but
and you passed by a lot of
yes, I
cattle
did.
and sheep in your time. So that is how complex this is. Thankfully, just been joined also by Brigadier General Kotia. Brigadier, thank you for time. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and good evening to my course commander and senior.
Yes, he's on the line with you. And as we try and really dissect this conflict and look at its anatomy, one of the key issues that we've been talking about in the last few minutes, and Kenan has helped us to look at that, is the GANs question. I don't know what your own take, because I know Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center, you've done a lot in trying to find out where these guns are coming from. And most importantly, I guess, and as the defense minister is now indicating, they are tracking and tracing these individuals behind these guns so they can smoke them out and prosecute. Do we know where these guns are coming from, apart from the ones we know that is being smuggled into the country, and those ones we know are being manufactured by blacksmiths? Who is buying and who is supplying?
Can I just give you the overview? And I agree with him on those points. And again, the minister in his interview with your station this morning made it clear that these are issues that the security and intelligence agencies are handling. So I think that for now, let's trust that our security agencies are doing their best to be able to resolve the issue about the guns. But more importantly, we must understand that the peace process is very key. And I want to emphasize on that more so far as this discussion is concerned, that the mediation effort that was led by the minister was important. Whilst I agree with the view that the minister leading the group to go there was very important, because even though he's a concombat, but then in modern peace, contemporary peacekeeping or peace operations, we see the local ownership so far as peace efforts are concerned. Now, from your own media reports, from your reporter and other news bulletins that we have read around, we've heard that the minister went with a number of chiefs from both sides, opinion leaders from both sides, religious leaders, members of parliament from both divides, and other past political leaders who went. Now, this is very significant because the effort that is being taken is a local effort. Let's forget about the idea that the minister himself is a state official, but then being a concombat and sending himself to that level to be able to mobilize this group to go there and be able to mediate, that was like a shuttle diplomacy. They be able to achieve a ceasefire, and that is good. Now it is now level a process in which they will continue peacemaking so that they will see how best this ceasefire can be maintained, and eventually the peace efforts is actually actualized.
Yeah, Brigadier General, you make an important point, and the minister himself has been addressing that point today. And in his view, the work is done is almost like a preparatory work for the more permanent solution. I want you to listen to how he put it and what he expects to now happen after his shuttle peace tour.
Yes, whether wrong or right, we went and the people have listened to us. As opinion leaders from the area, we went and the people have listened to us. So if they have listened to us, what do we do going forward? Who are the people who are going to send going forward in the peace process? I think that should be the focus. And I agree with you that if the people in the area were to see us as being part and parcel of that problem, like they would not listen to us. If the people themselves were to see us who went yesterday, the concombatants and the supposed opinion leaders who went since Friday, we have been going, if they were to see us as being part and parcel of the problem, like they will not listen to us. But they listen to us because they don't see us as being part and parcel of the problem. That's why they listened. That's why both sides have put down their arms. That's why the Chokosis have put down their arms. That's why the Konkombes have put down their arms. From both sides. I don't really come from Chilpone and Sawoba. I come from Bimbila. But I'm a Konkomba. And luckily for us, Daniel, they have stopped. I just think, like you have stated, other people should come in, and I agree with you that this team cannot be the right team to continue to mediate forward, going forward. I totally agree with you on that aspect. So I agree with the people who have made that suggestion that this team that I sent cannot be the right team to continue with the peace process and move forward.
So let me bring in Colonel Festus Abuaji. When the minister says the team he sent in, he agrees cannot be the right team to lead the process going forward. Then which other team can do that? What's your own prescription then? This is the minister inviting us to engage that. What's your own prescription if his team is not the team to do it long term?
So permit me to go back to 1994. In 1994, at the peak of the what the army called Operation Gong Gong 4, as part of the peace process, the government then, which was the NDC, established what they call the PNT, Permanent Negotiating Team. I don't recall the composition of that group, but we need a permanent grouping. Let's also acknowledge that at the time, we didn't have this institution called the National Peace Council. Now we have the National Peace Council. We have the National Civic Education, body. I think the effort at managing the conflict, de-escalating or de-conflicting it, should be vested in the Peace Council. And Peace Council's capacity can be enhanced by adding other groups like the Kofi Annan Center that we've mentioned, and other civil society organizations, other religious leaders, other traditional leaders, who are not indigenous to the conflict area, because the indigenes will have emotional attachment to the different causes. And then we need to depoliticize the process. In other words, we should not have, political actors as part of the team, because it's going to now, reduce itself to the usual, this party and that party is behind this group and all that group. But a group that is not attached to any of the political groups, and as I said, led by the National Peace Council, supported by other expert institutions and so on, traditional leaders, religious leaders and so on, I think can help. It's going to be a process. It's not going to be an event. We should bear that in mind. But as we're doing that, we definitely need, as we did in Operation Gong Gong, to deploy security forces to stabilize or pacify the place. I'm not sure. I know the military, I don't know in what numbers. I don't know the nature of the deployment. But in 1994, it was a shoot-to-kill affair in order to impress upon the different parties. Remember that in 1994, one of the groups, indeed the Konkomba group, for instance, had the audacity and the impudence to even set an ambush in which a second Lieutenant Agbanyo was killed. On the day that the CNC, former President Rawlings, was visiting the conflict area. So we need to be informed of history and look at this conflict, all the conflicts raging in and around this country, a bit more serious.
And learn from them. But I want to quickly, just for the sake of time, bring in Brigadier General for quick 30 seconds on your comment on the Defense Minister's invitation to look at the long-term strategy. In a few seconds, what would you say that should be?
That is a good call. And as like we're saying, we have got statutory actors now in this country, like the Peace Council that Colonel Abuaji mentioned. We have got the regional security councils around. We have got civil society organizations. Let me quickly mention that OneUp has done, the West African Network for Peace Building has done a lot of work in the northern part of Ghana so far as building peace in these conflict areas is concerned. And getting some of the civil society organizations to support